Create the life you love. Create the life you don't want to retire from. Find work that's worthwhile. If you do things that you hate, slowly invest in yourself. Don't just put it into funds, put it into you. Take that leap of faith on a life that you enjoy, and just know you'll make mistakes along the way. That's part of the process. I started in the financial services field by basically peddling life insurance initially and mutual funds. And then in the year 2000, when the market started to go down, that's when my real education began. And I started to figure out, like, how do I help people become more efficient with their money and plug financial leaks and get their financial house in order? And that was kind of what it evolved to. And then really got into the world of financial coaching and organization, and a little bit less on the product side as time went on, and referred all that out. Sold that business in 2021, did a comedy special because why not? Sounds like a midlife crisis to a degree, going and doing comedy, but we actually filmed the comedy special that got picked up and it'll come out in 2024. And been touring around with my new book and doing a lot of speaking and a children's book coming out. So yeah, I like to do anything that, I end up either writing or being on stage, it seems. And when I was 5, that was my favorite thing, was to family parties. My uncles were hilarious, and it just always felt like love and celebration. And so I went to Italy for a summer, had some downtime, and my wife made the mistake of saying I was kind of funny, which I translated to like I'm a comedic god, because I made her kind of laugh. And then I was introduced as being hilarious at an event that I spoke at, told some jokes, went well, so I took it up as a hobby. Did my first open mic August of 2017. That went pretty well. Started opening for some comedians that were mainly performing in Utah. And then in 2019, when they filmed their special, there was an agent there and was like, man, I've never seen someone do what you're doing around money. I think that you should do something around that. And finally, November of 2020, I'm like, I want to film a comedy special, and went all in, called The American Ream, drop the D, and it's about the ream, and it's a lot around money, a little bit around my family and upbringing, and some mostly real stories about that. And man, I've just had a blast doing that. I definitely haven't made money on the comedy special. I have, however, been hired by a handful of firms to do comedy at financial events, and they pay me like anywhere from 18 to 25 grand to do that, depending on how much time I was on stage or whether I wrote a roast and stuff like that. So I mean, that's not lucrative, but it was pretty good for something that started as a hobby. As far as the special, I'm deep in the hole right now, but we'll see what happens as it starts streaming, and if that turns around or if it just builds the brand up. If it does nothing but what it did so far, it was one of the best investments of my life as far as enjoyment and fun and challenging and all those things. Yeah, so June of 98, I started in Guardian Life, right? And basically they called it an internship. I got paid a couple $1,000 a month and had to kind of earn the commissions over time for that monthly salary. But I was 19 years old, still in college, and it gave me some time to make some mistakes as far as, just putting people in the market, not knowing enough about it. And then when the year 2000 market started to decline, that's when, again, I was like, okay, what am I really going to do? And I just started traveling everywhere, every single month that I could, to find out who are the brightest financial minds and utilize my young age to be able to interview them and figure out better ways and even get them to do some business with me. I just was like intellectually curious and ferocious about learning. And so in 2006, I dropped my Guardian FR, field representative contract, because I was actually teaching at events that Guardian agents were hosting, and they didn't want me to do that. And I wanted to launch a radio show, and they didn't want me to do that because of compliance. And I wanted to write a book. And so I was like, look, I'm going to move more towards a monthly membership to start this kind of movement of what we call the producer revolution, to help people learn how to create more value and embrace this producer paradigm versus a consumer condition. So one of abundance versus scarcity. And that really kind of took off. And that's when I became more in the intellectual property and coaching world, and kind of building financial teams that I referred these people out to so that they could get the transactions done from the education, because I wasn't going to be able to provide all that. I tried early on, but had a little boutique mortgage firm, a boutique, property and casualty firm. And what I found was I was never going to do the very best thing for clients because I didn't have the wherewithal and the bandwidth and the staying power or the passion for those things. And so it was great just to find people that was their jam. That's what they love to do, and refer to them. Free Flow Group, it's really using entertainment to educate. And I'm finally, after all these years, building up my personal brand. Heard those things were started, 20 years ago? Finally, a little late to the party, but I love to write. So Even I'm behind there, but I'm ahead of the curve, hopefully on the entertainment to educate type of side. And so it's really Free Flow Group as a media company using intellectual property to educate the world, but also financial advisors. And I just hosted a 2-day event for 25 financial advisors at my house because back in the day, I used to have a study group, got to 180 people before my business partners died in a plane crash in '06. And I just forgot how much I enjoyed that because there's a lot of kind of leverage in helping them and see all the impact it makes for them helping their clients. So really, I've got a comprehensive financial services firm using software to help support that entire process and the education, the media company, and then, teaching people in the financial industry. So those are kind of the 3 legs of what I'm up to right now. The economic value of certainty. I just finished rewriting What Would the Rockefellers Do and put my version of that economic value of certainty as a bonus chapter at the end to kind of honor him and what he taught me, but also use my personal stories to make it more kind of current and in my voice. His article was basically talking about if you're financially independent, where you have enough cash flow to cover your expenses, then you've got this certainty, which means you can swing for the fences in other aspects and areas of your life, knowing that that's handled. So his article said, imagine if you had a 10-year government contract, you knew that was coming in every single month. How'd that change how you operate? Because you knew predictably the money was coming in. You didn't have to just go earn it the next day. So it was really an argument for cash flow and to limit risk because so many people were chasing returns and having volatility and waiting for 30 years to find out if it was going to work out. But then they are on this roller coaster ride of emotion up and down. He said, what happens when you have certainty? Is there's actually an economic value that you could be more productive knowing that your foundation is set. And because the foundation isn't sexy or something people really like focus on sometimes and they neglect it, it creates that unintentional risk that actually starts to hijack their mindset and they're less abundant, less innovative, less creative because they feel more at risk. And so that's what certainty does for us is it lets us make choices knowing that something's there for us because we're not worried and that fear doesn't override our thinking. And then that when we have those clear thoughts, we can think more in the world of serving others and solving problems and creating value. So that certainty actually lets us become more productive. There's an economic value to that stability. Like those first couple of years that the book was out, we just had this like hardcover copy and we were putting it up on Amazon for $1,000 because I wanted people to come to us and drove them to our website and try to get my co-author Mike on stages. So it was a little bit slow because of our model and our pricing. And then we put it out as a paperback for like $10 and started to promote it at my old firm Wealth Factory. And then all of a sudden it sold hundreds of thousands of copies because advisors were buying it like in the dozens at a time and giving it to clients. And the whole concept was the Vanderbilt family had more money than the U.S. Treasury at one time. And yet, after Cornelius Vanderbilt died and passed the money on to his son, it took 9 years to double that estate. But then his son died, and that was the last time that estate grew. It actually just started to diminish. And within 54 years of that time, the first Vanderbilt died broke. They had all these mansions in New York that have either been torn down or sold to other people. They own the Breakers in Rhode Island. They don't anymore. They own the Biltmore estates in the Carolinas. That's all gone because they learned to kind of be wealthy socialites instead of value creators. And so they destroyed one of the largest, amounts of money adjusted for inflation in history. Yet the Rockefellers are on their 6th generation of passing on wealth. They're worth $20 billion or more. They have around 200 people benefiting from the trust, but not as trust fund babies. So what were the differences between the Rockefeller family and the Vanderbilt family is what the study of the book is. And so I go, from side to side, kind of looking at the differences and nuances, and then just talk about what are the most simple things that anybody could do, because there's not very many people wealthy as the Rockefellers. So how can we borrow from some of that knowledge to make different financial choices today? And it's number one, what's the simplest thing you could do? Then number two, what's the next thing you could do? And then we get into some legacy factors, like creating a family constitution that's these philosophies and interests that you have personally, and you leave a signpost inside of your trust for future generations. And then use life insurance death benefit to replenish that trust over time so the next generation isn't born into financial bondage again. And so the book's really about insurance heavily in the first version. The second version still has those kind of core pieces, but I've added a little bit more depth on the legacy side. 10 years from the time my business partners and I wanted to write our first book, and then it's almost 10 years since I first wrote What Would the Rockefellers Do? It's now more like what would the wealthy do? Because I looked at not just the Rockefellers, but looked at like what Walt Disney did with how he handled some of his finances, and the Kennedy family and how they handled things, and just keep saying, how does this apply to the common person, not just the uber wealthy? And so it's about a third longer than the first version, but with a lot of like depth on that legacy side that I just didn't really have the wherewithal and understanding at the time I first wrote it, that I've now learned over a lot of client interactions and a lot of conversations and study since the first version. Sometimes they even show my book on there when they're doing it. Other times they don't. They do these, like I've had people that I've coached that do little mini documentaries on it. The thing is, I created the context, but I didn't create the concept. I wrapped it really well in the book, and I'm glad that it kind of inspired. The reason that book sold so many copies were financial advisors buying it. So I can't really feel like I missed the boat because I didn't do TikTok. It's just not in my personality at this point. The main thing is that there's this family legacy ring that I write about, which is number one, the family office, which I talk about in the first version. But because most people aren't worth $300 million, they can't just afford to have their own financial team that works exclusively for them. So it's how do you build out that office and why that's important and how you work towards that over your life. Then the second thing is the family retreat structure, which is your rituals, your traditions, and the symbols that every major organization and religion have, but most families neglect these days. But if you start to get that, you start to solidify the chances of the wealth staying from generation to generation. Here's the things that we've learned, and here's some signposts we want to leave behind. And these are just statements and philosophies that you can use as guidance to be more dynamic as you build a board of trustees that once you're gone, help kind of navigate this whole thing rather than just legalese. And so I really invested more time in that family constitution side of things and sharing some pieces that I did in the first book. I shared kind of like extracted some of those pieces. This time I'm giving an entire workbook for everybody that buys the book. It's called the Legacy Toolkit, where they get the full structure of how to build family retreat, where they get the full structure of how to build family constitution, and they get the building blocks for building a trust and paying their kids and teaching them how to be more wise with money. And so that's a whole other dimension. I think that if I were to be critical of the first book is I just spent a lot of time on properly structured, overfunded whole life insurance. And I didn't even say it that clearly, but I did kind of get a little bit redundant in talking about that. So I was able to take out a little bit of that redundancy and instead dedicate it to some of these legacy aspects, because the feedback we got on the book last time was these legacy things really changed the way I view my family and my money when it comes to passing it on for generations. And I'm like, well, that's pretty amazing considering I wrote the book primarily to pitch insurance initially. And somehow it has almost 2,200 reviews on Amazon that are like 4.6 stars. Not bad for a book primarily about insurance. So I thought it merited the dedication towards legacy that also encapsulates a lot of the Rockefeller method and what other wealthy people do to get past the third generation. Yeah, and my attorneys have influenced me on these concepts over the years, sharing things that are in the book. Like there's a letter from Henry Phipps that started Bessemer Trust, which came from being part of the Andrew Carnegie companies. And so like just seeing how they grew to $10 billion inside of that from the money they started with, and how they left signposts versus mandates. And so these attorneys have helped me see if you have a decent amount of wealth, you can look at an asset protection trust, which means it's irrevocable, yet you get to choose your distribution trustee, so you still have access to your money, and you can follow the Rockefeller tenet of own nothing, control everything. And so all of a sudden you can move things out of your estate without having it be out of your touch or out of your reach, which a lot of the kind of planning of the past kind of had. Having that is kind of the centerpiece, and for wealthier people, having some type of holding company that then owns their interest in other companies as they have additional ventures and investments and things like that. So it kind of flows through to the main holding company to simplify from a tax perspective, and also to be able to maximize the tax write-offs in the holding company without having partners in the other companies feeling like you've overtaken the profitability through tax deduction. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but I found a good handful of attorneys that just really buy into what I'm talking about in this, because before they even read the book, we're already setting up legal structures consistent with what I'm teaching about, because it was really from attorneys that I learned about the Rockefeller method from the trust aspect and how that was set up. And if you're really wealthy, maybe it's offshore trust, but for the most part, I like to see domestic trusts, even though they don't provide quite as much security, but they're not quite as onerous to get to your money and, those factors. So, I have a handful of attorneys that could implement everything that I'm talking about in the book, like no problem, understand it. They're all congruent and aligned with different firms. There's also one thing to consider, which is called co-publishing, which allows you to have the distribution of a publisher, but you still have all the rights to the book, and you determine what goes in it or changes or not, and then you get the chance to run it like a self-publishing campaign as well. So they can actually get it into bookstores if that matters to you, and they can do co-ops where you can get it into airports. And but at the same time, you can just do it yourself. If you end up selling large quantities of books, you can just send it off on your own if you want, or even from their warehouse directly to the customers. A co-publisher might be a consideration. There are additional fees, there are, storage fees, and there might be design fees and things like that, but it still lets you kind of hit the lists if that matters. I don't know if they matter all that much. I do have a publisher for I Am Money, and that's my kids' book, and I just don't know anything about kids' books, and this publisher has been phenomenal at bookings and marketing, and it's one of 3 kids' books that they have this coming year, so it's not like they're overburdened on it. They've got a big sales force. I really think this book's probably going to outsell all my other books because people read kids' books cover to cover, and it's really, my co-author sold 3 million copies of kids' books, and so she did a phenomenal job of taking the content, making it fun, making it simple, yet keeping it really impactful, which is really hard to do. I tried it before for kids, and mine sucked, but thank God she's really good at it. January 2nd, 2024, the book comes out. Barnes & Noble, Amazon. There's a soft cover that comes out on Amazon as well, or on Barnes & Noble as well, because they're really trying to get it into schools, but the hardcover's only $6 more, and it's way sexier. It's like, I love it. It's happy. It makes me happy. First off, I wrote the book. Like, I haven't been the one to sit down and write all my books. I've had amazing ghostwriters for the early books when I was scared to write. So I just love and fell in love with the process of writing. But in 2008, I was really frustrated because I was excited that Killing Sacred Cows came out, but at the same time, I was dealing with a lot of chaos with my first year. My business wasn't growing, and I was having to figure out how to navigate this crazy recession and economy, and was overextended in real estate. And as I was looking at my mistakes and saying, how could I learn from them? One thing I realized is, like, I viewed money very different than my wife did. And I had worked with a lot of clients by this time. And I was like, they had kind of different ways they viewed money. I was like, I want deep research on what's someone's money persona. How many personas are out there? What impacts that persona? What's the shadow side that comes from scarcity? What's the winning side? I wanted someone else to write it. I didn't want to write it because I don't like researching, but I did find a team that helped me research. I did do work for years and years and years. Here we are. The book came out October of 2023, and I started to write it way back in 2017. So it took quite a while for the book to be written because it took almost like 9 years, 8 years to figure out money personas and how they worked and have enough research and work with enough people to determine, all the different aspects of it. But once I discovered, I was like, I have to write a book about this because this is the subconscious belief system that governs our money behavior, and it's the thing that dictates our success or our failure more than anything else. And then it was, why is it we're so either afraid of money or attracted to money? Why is it some people are chasing money and other people are like hoarding it and holding on to it? And so once I understood those money personas, I'm like, what's the context look like where we can learn how to make more money, keep the money we make, and then grow our money that's consistent with who we are, and teaching people how to profit from the ideas up front or tap into hidden capital like mental and relationship capital instead of just chase financial capital. And so this became kind of my life's work. This became the thing I was most passionate about, and I think it's my best book by far. And I just think that our relationship to money is indicative of the relationship that we have to ourselves, and wherever we're abusive to ourselves, we're usually abusive to money. Wherever we haven't resolved or loved ourselves, we usually try to get money to do the job for us, and it's inadequate to do it. So if we can heal our relationship with money, put it in its proper place and understand it, it just liberates us, and we can have a whole new level of freedom. So that's what Money Unmasked is about, and I'm dedicating the next 20 years of my life to help make it the most influential financial book of all time. I mean, I think it's important work. When people understand it, it helps them feel so much better about life and understand the context of money and the concept of money. So the 4 shadow personas are the miser who plays a game called preservation. They end up with funds, that they won't spend because they're addicted to holding on to what they've got. There's the conservative that plays a game called accumulation. They end up with funds they can't spend because they're afraid, am I ever going to have enough? Then there's the striver playing the game called status, who thinks they could just work harder to make more money, but inevitably burn out. And there's the high roller playing the game called opportunity, but often goes bankrupt because they take on too much risk and cut corners, which leads to short-lived riches. So those are the 4 shadow personas that come from scarcity, isolation, selfishness, zero-sum games. It's very limiting mindset, but there is a winning side that comes from co-creation and collaboration that comes from a place of abundance. And so instead of a miser, you have a mindful manager. Mindful manager is detail-oriented. They're efficient. They're great at improving things. The great thing about them is is when they look at an organization, they might find out where you can enhance ideas or reduce waste. Or instead of a conservative, you have the planner on the winning side. The planner is a stable, thoughtful, and strategic person. They're instrumental for organizations looking to not only maximize efficiency, but monitor the effectiveness of any initiative. So again, it's looking at the bigger picture and beyond themselves. Or so the striver, you get a creator, which is an artist, an inventor, an entrepreneur. They lead with innovation and ingenuity, and they create more value. Or instead of a high roller, the winning side is the catalyst, a visionary, a connector, a mover and shaker. They think and play big and show us ways we can all win together. So it's a matter of which side, which money persona are you, and what leads you to the shadow side or what leads you to the winning side. And there's certain formulas that I share in the book that really help with that co-creation and collaboration being a small piece of it, actually a big piece of it, but there's kind of some things to fill in that make a huge difference in bridging that gap. But once you know what your money persona is, your employees or a spouse or your kids, you can know what their strengths are that can help you not only stay on track, but get further if you understand those strengths. But if you don't, you can see it as opposition and frustration. It can create fighting and friction. Think about money as the number one reason people list for divorce. So I saw this book as being like, if people knew their money personas, maybe we can reduce some of that financial stress and open up a lot more possibilities moving forward and have a much better, richer life. Well, I mean, you could say like taking the money persona quiz is very helpful. GarrettGunderson.com/quiz. Another thing is they can go back to their childhood and ask, what's their first memory of money? And was that a good memory or was it a difficult memory? And what do they say money says about them and who they are? And when we can identify what those earliest memories are, we start to see these antidotes, or we start to see these footprints that led to what created money stress in the future. Maybe we feel like if we don't have enough, we're not safe and our family's at risk, or if we don't have enough, we're not valuable enough in the world, not worthy. And so when we can look back into some of the childhood wounds we have around money and stories, we start to see the stressors that are created later on. Now, I do know if you've got 6 months of your expenses set aside in savings, tends to reduce stress. If you're financially independent, where you have enough cash flow to cover your basic expenses, that reduces stress. When you find out ways to plug leaks so you don't overpay on the government or to interest, or overpay on non-performing investment fees or improper structures with insurance, that reduces stress. When you know where you're set or not set financially, so that you can turn those things where you're like, I'm not set, into knowing that you're set, it will reduce financial stress because you feel like you have a solid foundation. When money's no longer intimidating because it seems confusing or like spreadsheets or something that you don't understand, and understand what it means, that it's a man-made efficient tool, that it's simply a way to exchange with one another. It doesn't represent our value. It just stores the value that we've created in the past. And even though it may not reflect our potential, it's also something we can tap into in order to be more productive. But if we're afraid of it, we're not going to tap into it. If we're hoarding it, then it's going to be at odds with us. Or if we're chasing it, we never find that joy. So here's the thing that reduces our money stress the most. We design the life we don't want to retire from. We create the game worth winning. We find work that is worthwhile, that we enjoy, and we find and accept money as a byproduct of the value that we create instead of hiding from it or running to it. And that's what I call win first, then play. So knowing our money persona, building our peace of mind fund, turning our I'm not set into I'm set, and knowing it when it comes to safety and security and money investing, focusing on cash flow and economic independence, and plugging those financial leaks, and then investing back into ourselves so we improve our quality of life. We improve our skill set so we can make more money, and we improve our cash flow so that we're less reliant upon us working each day. Money stress starts to go down. Now, knowing our money persona of our spouse can drastically reduce our money stress, because now we know where their strengths are and where they might get into survival and how that can create conflict, and have new conversations. We can ask those questions of ourselves and the ones we love, where we shaped our money beliefs, so we can start to see where that's serving us or sabotaging us. I'm a believer in investor DNA. So I think the three main assets that drive your recurring revenue are businesses, intellectual property, and real estate. But there's all types of real estate. There's commercial real estate, there's duplexes, fourplexes, there's single family residents, there's people that do fix and flip, there's people that get involved in tax liens or bridge financing before bank financing comes in, there's development. I think that if you treat it like a business and it's aligned with your investor DNA, which is your values and your competencies and your drivers, and you focus, it could be the right investment. But risk isn't in the investment, it's in the investor. So what kind of investor are you? I think if you just hand it off and hope that it works out, you know, it's tough to go find a duplex when interest rates were low. Everybody was competing against it, and it didn't make a lot of sense. Right now, there's a little bit more deals coming up because we've seen a change in interest rates and people are a little bit more distressed. So if you're patient and you look at deal flow, maybe real estate could be good for you. I buy real estate that I can drive to easily, that I can utilize myself, but I can also make money with that real estate by renting it out if I choose to. I don't rent out my house, but I just hosted an event for 25 financial advisors here. That would have been 20 grand going to a hotel. So it saved 20 grand and it made it feel more intimate having people over at my house. And yeah, I mean, so I do still like real estate, but it's only one thing. I really focus on intellectual property primarily, business secondarily, and real estate as a tertiary kind of asset that is a little bit of an inflation protection. But I don't believe in having unlimited amounts or more than I can handle or having to hire really big teams for it. So it took me a little bit of time to be like, I could be content with what I have in real estate versus thinking I always have to have more. But that doesn't mean that I'm complacent because I'm on my 10th book will come out in a year or two because I already have a manuscript for the 10th one. They don't pay themselves first automatically, so it's too laborious if they have to do it themselves and they get stuck in budgeting, which constrains them. They try to save or double their returns rather than become more efficient with their money. Save money on the IRS, on interest, on non-performing investment fees, and on improper structure with insurance, and that puts a lot more money in your pocket, and it's going to do a lot better than just trying to chase a higher return with taking on too much risk. People focus too much on accumulation and not enough on cash flow. That's a pretty big issue. They're not mindful about where their money goes, and so they don't differentiate expenses. Like some expenses are productive. You put $1 in, more than $1 comes out. Don't budget that. Keep putting in $1 as long as more than $1 comes out. They invest in things they know nothing about. They have way too much speculation. They lock money away till 59 and a half. They think they're saving tax when they're merely delaying tax. They think that money's too complicated, so they just trust someone that's probably more of a salesperson than an educator. So, I mean, I could kind of go on for days and days. As you know, I write books on the myths around money. The number one issue is people believe in a zero-sum game of scarcity. So they think it's take what you can, hold on to what you get, instead of thinking in a collaborative, abundant world. And when they think it's scarcity and zero-sum game, they think irrationally, and that being irrational means it destroys their wealth. It destroys their mindset, and it prevents them from creating more exchange. So it's really about embracing the life that you love, employing more energy and investing back into yourself. And when you invest in yourself, you increase your skill sets, and then you increase your financial savvy, and you end up with a much better situation when you have cash flow that covers your expenses, because now you have permission to live the life that you want, and you're not beholden to having to work every day in order to exchange that time for money, which can get exhausting. If you gave me money today, I can take that money and use it again. And then whoever I give it to gets to use it again. That's velocity. The more times money exchanges hands, the more wealth is created. And if we went back 200 years, the world had a lot less wealth than we do today. Because human life value, people have organized property value to be more useful. We've had technology so that we could travel faster. We have more access to a lot of things that didn't even exist in the past, and we built on top of those so that we built from the ideas that we're actually able to be more efficient and effective and provide a lot more for a lot more people. So zero-sum game is, hey, I buy this and it's gone. Like there's only so much pie. If I have a piece, there's less pie for you. But money and pie are definitely not the same thing. Even if there was a limited amount of money, there's an unlimited number of times it can exchange hands. We can use it to buy computers and clothes and food and shelter and entertainment like comedy and concerts. So basically, the more times money exchanges hands, the more value is created. And if we understand that money is a game of value creation, and the more value we create, the more dollars will follow that value, we can all end up wealthier because we've produced more goods, services, and experiences for each other rather than holding on to it and hoarding it. So I don't invest in options because options are win-lose. I don't invest in things that only one person wins at the expense of another, like gambling, because one person knew and the other person didn't, and we're just taking. Like you can invent a new business, invent a new technology, and multiple people could win. You could buy my kids' book, have your kids be better off financially, and that $15 that you gave me is worth less than the $15 of education that they received, and that means we both ended up wealthier. That's the key. You have your own unique abilities. In Dan Sullivan's terms or in my terms, you have a sole purpose. And if you understand that, it's unique and different than anyone else on the planet, even if there's some commonalities. So there's a divinity to that diversity. And the more we use that diversity to be able to provide things that other people don't have the know-how or the insight to provide, the wealthier we all become. But if we try to save all that by doing things we hate, in the name of trying to save money. And we get exhausted in the things we're incompetent in just because we're trying to scrimp, save, sacrifice, and defer. Then nobody ends up wealthier, even though we have some money in the bank account. So it's velocity, it's exchange. Those are the factors that create wealth. And we get money to keep exchanging over and over again. It doesn't just disappear. Create the life you love. Create the life you don't want to retire from. Find work that's worthwhile. If you do things that you hate, slowly invest in yourself. Don't just put it into funds, put it into you. Take that leap of faith on a life that you enjoy, and just know you'll make mistakes along the way. That's part of the process. But learn from the mistakes so you don't repeat them over and over again. And just know that you're worthy, you're worth it, and you're lovable. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.